They say rock bottom is the solid foundation on which you rebuild your life. But when Beryl Vance walked out of the courtroom that Tuesday morning, she didn't feel a foundation. She felt the earth opening up to swallow her whole. Her husband of 10 years, the man she had worked double shifts to support while he built his empire, hadn't just divorced her. He had erased her. No alimony, no home, just a suitcase and a broken heart. She thought her life was over. She had no idea that a single wrong turn in the rain and a door opening at the wrong address was about to change the entire global economy and her destiny forever. This isn't just a breakup story. This is the story of how a rejected wife became the queen of the board. The signature on the divorce settlement was barely dry when Mark Sterling checked his Rolex, a submariner that Beryl had bought him for his 30th birthday, using 3 years of savings. He didn't look at her. He looked at the time. "Are we done here?" Mark asked, his voice devoid of the warmth that used to greet her after a long day. He sat across the mahogany table in the law offices of Sullivan, Pierce and Moore in downtown Manhattan. The view outside was grey, matching the hollow feeling in Beryl's chest. "We're done, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer, James Sullivan, said, snapping a thick file shut. "The prenuptial agreement you signed 10 years ago, combined with the recent restructuring of your assets into the offshore holdings in the Caymans, leaves Mrs. Sterling with, well, as discussed, the settlement is final." Beryl stared at her hands. They were rougher than they used to be. 10 years ago, she was a promising graphic designer. Then Mark had an idea for a tech logistics startup. Streamline logistics. It needed capital. It needed time. It needed a wife who would scrub floors and wait tables at a diner called Gino's on 4th Avenue just to pay the server bills. She had done it all. She had believed in the we. "Mark," Beryl whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't care about the shares. But the house? My mother's piano is in there. You know that's the only thing I have left of her." Mark finally looked at her. His eyes, once a comforting blue, were now cold steel. He stood up, buttoning his $5,000 Italian suit. "The house is being liquidated to cover the initial IPO costs for the merger with Vortex Corp," Mark said flatly. "And Jessica wants to redecorate the penthouse anyway. The piano was donated to Goodwill yesterday. It was clutter." The name hit her like a physical blow. Jessica. Mark's 24-year-old chief of staff, the woman Beryl had welcomed into their home for Christmas dinner last year, thinking she was a lonely employee. "You donated it," Beryl choked out, standing up. "Mark, you knew. You knew that piano was—" "It's done, Beryl," Mark interrupted, checking his phone. "Look, I'm not a monster. I put $5,000 in your personal account. That's enough for a deposit on an apartment in Queens and a few months to find a job. You're resourceful. You survived before me. You'll survive after me." He turned to the lawyer. "James, send the finalized papers to the board. I have a celebration dinner at Le Bernardin at 7. Mark walked out. He didn't look back. He walked out of the marriage the same way he walked out of a boring meeting, efficiently, ruthlessly, and without a second thought for the people he was leaving behind. Beryl stood there, the silence of the conference room deafening. "Mrs. Sterling, or Ms. Vance, I suppose," the lawyer said, sliding a check across the table. "I suggest you cash this quickly. It's a courtesy. Legally, he owed you nothing." "Why?" she asked, tears finally spilling over. "I built that company with him. I wrote the original business plan on napkins." "On napkins," Sullivan sneered politely. "Not on contracts. In the world of business, Miss Vance, if it isn't signed, it didn't happen. You were a placeholder, a startup cost. And now, the company has gone public." Beryl grabbed her purse. She left the check on the table. It was a foolish pride, perhaps, but she couldn't touch money that felt like hush money for a decade of her life. She walked out of the skyscraper and onto Fifth Avenue. It had started to rain, a cold, biting November rain. She had nowhere to go. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mark. "Security codes to the house have been changed. Your suitcases are with the doorman. Please collect them by 5 p.m. or they go to the curb." May. Beryl looked up at the sky, letting the rain mix with her tears. She felt small, invisible. She was 32 years old, with a gap in her resume the size of a marriage and a heart shattered into a million pieces. She hailed a cab, her hand shaking. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked. She didn't know. She just gave him the address of the only other person in the city who might care. Her old college roommate, Brenda, who lived in a cramped walk-up in Brooklyn. 429 Willow Street, she whispered. But as the cab merged into traffic, Beryl didn't see the black SUV trailing her, and she certainly didn't know that Mark's cruelty had just set off a chain reaction that would wake a sleeping giant. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time the cab dropped Beryl off. She wrestled her 2 suitcases out of the trunk, the driver speeding off before she could even check her bearings. She wiped the water from her eyes and looked at the building. This didn't look like Brenda's place. Brenda lived in a loud, vibrant neighborhood in Brooklyn. This was the Upper East Side. It was a street lined with townhouses that whispered old money. Heavy iron gates, limestone facades, and silence. Beryl checked her phone. Dead battery. She must have mumbled the address wrong in her daze, or the driver misheard Willow for Willoughby, or some other street. She shivered. She was soaked to the bone. Her silk blouse, her court-date blouse, was clinging to her skin. She looked at the house number in front of her. 1428. It was a massive structure, dark and imposing, with ivy crawling up the stone walls like veins. There were no lights on. It looked abandoned, or perhaps just asleep. "Okay, Beryl," she muttered to herself, her teeth chattering. Just ask to use a phone. Just get a charger. You can't stand on the street with 2 suitcases in a storm." She dragged the luggage up the stone steps. They felt like they weighed a ton, filled with the debris of her life. Clothes, a few books, and the framed photo of her and Mark from their honeymoon, which she hadn't had the heart to throw away yet. She reached for the heavy brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head. She let it fall 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. Silence. She waited. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "Please," she whispered. "Just someone be home." She knocked again, harder this time. Desperation was setting in. If no one answered, she'd have to drag her bags to a subway station, and the nearest one was avenues away. Suddenly, the heavy oak door groaned. It didn't open fully, it just cracked a few inches. A chain was still engaged. A pair of eyes peered out from the darkness. They were intense, dark, and set in a face that was shadowed. "We don't buy Girl Scout cookies," a deep, gravelly voice rumbled. "And we don't want any solar panels." "Please," Beryl said, her voice cracking. I don't want to sell anything. I'm lost. My phone died. I just need to call a cab. Please, I'm soaked." The eyes narrowed, scanning her. They took in the expensive but soaked blouse, the designer suitcases, the utter devastation in her posture. This wasn't a beggar. This was a woman falling apart. The door closed for a second. Beryl's heart sank. He was locking her out. Then, the sound of the chain sliding back echoed. The door swung open wide. Standing there was a man who looked like he hadn't seen the sun in months. He was tall, wearing a black turtleneck and grey sweatpants. He had a beard that was neatly trimmed but thick, and his hair was dark, swept back carelessly. But it was his face that struck her. It was handsome, undeniably, but it carried a weight, a sadness that mirrored her own. And then, something strange happened. He looked at her, really looked at her, and his lips curled upward. It wasn't a leer, it wasn't a polite grimace. It was a genuine, warm smile, the kind of smile you give someone you've been waiting for. "Well," the man said, stepping aside and gesturing into the warm, golden light of the hallway. "You better come in before you catch pneumonia. I'm Julian." Beryl hesitated. Her mother had taught her never to enter a stranger's house, but Mark had taught her that the people you trust are the ones who hurt you the most. Maybe a stranger was safer. She stepped across the threshold, dragging her wet suitcase. The moment her heel hit the marble floor of the foyer, the warmth enveloped her. "I'm Beryl," she said, dripping water onto an intricate Persian rug. "I'm so sorry about your floor." "Floor's dry," Julian said, closing the massive door and locking out the storm. "Spirits are harder to fix." He walked past her, towards a grand staircase. "I was just making tea. Earl Grey. I assume you take it with lemon? You look like a lemon person. Sugar is for people who haven't had a hard enough day yet." Beryl blinked, stunned. "How did you—" "Yes. Lemon. No sugar." Julian paused on the first step and turned back. The light from the chandelier hit his face, and Beryl gasped. She recognized him, not from the tabloids, not from the society pages where Mark desperately tried to be featured. She recognized him from a dusty business textbook she had read in college. Julian Thorne, the boy king of Wall Street, the prodigy who had made his first billion by 22, revolutionized biotech, and then, 5 years ago, famously vanished. He had liquidated his public assets, retreated from the boardrooms, and disappeared. Rumors said he went mad. Others said he was heartbroken. Most just said he was a myth. And here he was, in sweatpants, offering her tea. You're Julian Thorne," Beryl stammered. Julian's smile faded slightly, replaced by a guarded look. "I am. And you, Beryl Vance, are currently shivering on my rug. And unless I'm mistaken, those are the suitcases of a woman who just signed a very unfair contract." Beryl stiffened. "How do you know my last name? I only said Beryl." Julian tapped the side of his head. "I remember everything, Beryl. I remember the article in the Small Business Journal 7 years ago. The couple behind Streamline Logistics. You were in the background of the photo, holding the schematics. Mark was in the front, holding the champagne. I always wondered when the guy holding the champagne would realize the schematics were worth more." He leaned against the banister. "I've been waiting for a new chess partner," Julian said enigmatically. "Mark Sterling just made the biggest mistake of his life. And tonight, I think I'm going to help you make him pay for it." Beryl sat in a library that was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with Mark. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, and a fire crackled in a massive limestone hearth. She held the porcelain teacup with both hands to stop them from shaking. Julian sat opposite her in a leather wingback chair. He had changed into a crisp white button-down shirt, though he remained barefoot. It made him look dangerous, relaxed, yet ready to spring. "Vortex Corp," Julian said, breaking the silence. "That's who Mark is merging with, correct?" Beryl nodded. "Yes. The merger is supposed to be announced next week at the Global Tech Summit. It's why he divorced me now. Vortex wanted a clean slate for the CEO. No baggage. No wife from the working class." Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Clean slate, that's what Arthur Kane calls it when he buries bodies." He stood up and walked to a chaotic desk covered in blueprints and monitors. "Beryl, do you know why I disappeared 5 years ago?" "Burnout?" she guessed. "That's what the news said." "The news says what people pay it to say," Julian corrected. "I didn't burn out. I was pushed out. By Arthur Kane, the CEO of Vortex. They stole my proprietary algorithm for autonomous shipping. They stole my life's work, rebranded it, and sued me for copyright infringement. I had the money to fight, but not the will. My wife. She passed away in a car accident during the trial. I folded. I hid." Beryl looked at him with wide eyes. The pain in his voice was raw, echoing her own fresh wounds. "So, you hate Vortex," Beryl said, "and I hate Mark, who is about to hand over his company to Vortex." "Mark isn't just handing it over," Julian said, turning to face her, his eyes burning with intensity. "Mark is the Trojan horse. Vortex needs streamlined logistics because your husband's company has the one thing Vortex lacks, the last-mile distribution network, a network you designed." Beryl sat up straighter. "The hub-and-spoke model. I drew that up in 2018. "Exactly." Julian pointed a finger at her. "Mark Sterling is a suit. He's a handshake merchant. He doesn't understand the logistics. He just sells them. You understand them. If Mark merges with Vortex, they become a monopoly that controls 60% of global shipping. They will be untouchable." He walked over and knelt in front of her chair, bringing his face level with hers. "I have been waiting for a flaw in their armor," Julian whispered. "I thought it would be a glitch in their code. I never expected the flaw to be Mark's ego. He threw away the architect of his empire. He threw away you." Beryl felt a strange stir in her chest. For 10 years, Mark had told her she was lucky to be with him. Julian looked at her like she was the most valuable asset in the room. "What do you want to do?" Beryl asked. "I want to burn it down," Julian said calmly. "I want to stop that merger. I want to bankrupt Vortex and leave Mark Sterling with nothing but his cheap suit and his regrets. But I can't go out there. The world thinks I'm crazy. They won't listen to me." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick black folder. "But they will listen to Thorn Capital's new CEO," Julian said. Beryl looked around the empty room. "Who is that?" "You," Julian said. Beryl gasped, nearly dropping her tea. "Me? Julian, I'm a graphic designer. I'm a rejected wife. I have $5,000 and a suitcase of wet clothes." "You are the co-founder of Streamline Logistics, uncredited," Julian corrected firmly. "You know where the bodies are buried in Mark's company. You know the weak points in the distribution chain. I have the capital, billions of it, sitting in dormant accounts. I need a face. I need a warrior." He tossed the folder onto her lap. "This is a contract. It gives you 50% equity in a new venture, Phoenix Holdings. We will buy up the supply chain Mark needs before the merger goes through. We will squeeze him. We will make his company worthless before he can sign that deal with Vortex." Beryl looked down at the contract. It was insane. It was impossible. "And in return?" she asked. "In return," Julian smiled, and this time it was wicked. "You get to see the look on Mark's face when he realizes he divorced the woman who was about to become his boss." Beryl thought about the piano Mark had donated. She thought about Jessica redecorating her home. She thought about the napkin comment. She set the tea down. She picked up a pen from the table. "I don't need to read it," Beryl said, her voice hardening into steel. "Where do I sign?" The next 3 days were a blur, but they were not spent in a salon. Julian Thorne didn't believe in makeovers that involved just lipstick and hair dye. "You are entering a war zone," Julian shouted over the hum of multiple computer servers on day 1. "Fashion is just camouflage. Knowledge is ammunition." They were in his war room, a basement-level, converted into a high-tech command center. Mark's stock price is at $45.20. Julian pointed to a screen. It's inflated because of the merger rumors. We are going to short it. Do you know how to short a stock, Beryl? I think so, she stammered. Don't think. No, Julian snapped, though his eyes were encouraging. If you bet the price goes down, and you make it go down, you win. Mark relies on the East Coast hub in Jersey City. Who owns the lease on that warehouse? Beryl closed her eyes, accessing memories of late nights doing Mark's paperwork while he slept. The lease. It's up for renewal next month, owned by Kensington Properties. Good, Julian typed furiously. I just bought Kensington Properties. As of 5 minutes ago, we are Mark's landlords, and we are going to triple the rent. For 72 hours, Julian grilled her. He taught her corporate law, negotiation tactics, and how to read a room of hostile board members. He didn't treat her like a student. He treated her like a partner. He respected her mind. But they also had to address the camouflage. On the afternoon of the third day, a team of stylists arrived at the mansion. They weren't the flashy types who worked for pop stars. These were the serious, silent tailors who dressed presidents and queens. No pink, no frills, Julian instructed the head stylist, a French woman named Claudette. Beryl is not a flower. She is a blade. Dress her like a weapon. When Beryl finally stepped out of the dressing room, Julian was waiting in the foyer, checking his watch. He stopped. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, structured and sleek, that hugged her curves but offered no apology. It had a high slit up the leg and a neckline that was daring yet regal. Her hair, usually in a messy bun, was blown out into sleek, dark waves that cascaded over one shoulder. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of sharp, diamond earrings that caught the light like daggers. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. She looked nothing like the woman who had cried in the rain. "Well," Beryl asked, feeling self-conscious for the first time. "Is it too much?" Julian walked over to her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, then gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for a second, sending a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with business. "It's perfect," Julian said softly. His voice dropped an octave. "Mark is going to have a heart attack. Let's hope the paramedics are slow." He offered her his arm. "The car is waiting. The Global Tech Summit starts in an hour." The Global Tech Summit was held at the Jacob Javits Center. It was a sea of black suits, flashing cameras, and billion-dollar egos. Mark Sterling stood near the center stage, holding a glass of champagne. Jessica was clinging to his arm, wearing a flashy red dress that looked a bit too much like a prom costume. "You look tense, babe," Jessica cooed, sipping her drink. "I'm fine," Mark snapped, adjusting his tie. "I just haven't heard from the lawyers about the Jersey City warehouse lease. It's a minor hiccup." "Mr. Sterling," a reporter from Forbes approached with a microphone. "Are the rumors true? Is the merger with Vortex a done deal?" Mark put on his media smile. "We are very close, Mike. Tonight is about the future. Streamline Logistics is evolving." "And what about your wife?" the reporter asked, digging for dirt. "We heard the divorce was finalized just days ago." Mark's smile faltered. "Beryl and I grew apart. She preferred a simpler life. The corporate world wasn't for her." "Is that so?" The voice rang out across the hall, clear and commanding. It didn't come from a microphone, but it carried such authority that the nearby chatter died down instantly. Mark turned around. The glass of champagne slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Standing at the top of the grand staircase entrance was Beryl. But it wasn't the Beryl he knew. This woman radiated power, Flashbulbs erupted like lightning, and beside her, holding her hand firmly, was the ghost of Wall Street. "Julian Thorne?" someone whispered. "Is that Thorne? I thought he was dead." The whispers turned into a roar. Julian Thorne, the legend, had returned, and he was with Mark Sterling's ex-wife. Beryl and Julian descended the stairs, the crowd parting for them like the Red Sea. They walked straight toward Mark and Jessica. Mark's face was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Beryl! What? What are you doing here? You don't have an invitation." Beryl stopped inches from him. She towered over him in her heels. She looked at Jessica, then back at Mark, her expression one of cool amusement. "Actually, Mark," Beryl said, her voice smooth as silk, "I'm here as a keynote speaker, and as the new majority shareholder of Phoenix Holdings." "Phoenix what?" Mark stammered. "The company that just bought your debt," Julian interjected, stepping forward. His eyes locked onto Mark's with predatory delight. "Hello, Mark. I believe you're renting a warehouse in Jersey City? We need to talk about your eviction notice." The color drained from Mark's face completely. The cameras flashed blindingly, capturing the exact moment the hunter became the prey. Beryl leaned in close to Mark, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume, a scent he had never bought her. "You said I was a start-up cost," Beryl whispered. "We're about to audit your books, Mark, and I never miss a decimal point." The following Monday, the headquarters of Streamline Logistics was in chaos. The stock had plummeted 14% after the scene at the gala. Shareholders were panicking, and the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Mark Sterling sat at the head of the long glass table, sweating through his shirt. To his right sat Arthur Kane, the CEO of Vortex. Kane was a shark in human skin, bald, 60, with eyes that blinked too slowly. He was there to ensure his merger didn't fall apart. "This is a minor setback," Mark insisted, his voice shaking. "My ex-wife is emotional. She's acting out. This Phoenix Holdings is a shell company. They can't possibly hurt us." The double doors swung open. They didn't just open, they were pushed with force. Beryl walked in. She wore a sharp white suit this time, the color of mourning in some cultures, but today, the color of a clean slate. Julian walked a step behind her, carrying a briefcase. "You can't be in here," Mark shouted, standing up. "Security." "Sit down, Mark," Beryl said, her voice calm and authoritative. She didn't look at him. She looked at the board members. "I am the CEO of Phoenix Holdings. As of this morning, we own 51% of your debt obligations and the land under your 3 largest distribution centers. If you want security to throw me out, I'll have to evict your entire inventory first." A murmur of terror went through the board. Beryl walked to the front of the room. Mark was forced to step aside or be physically brushed away. She took the seat at the head of the table. His seat. "Here is the reality," Beryl said, sliding a folder across the table to Arthur Kane. "Mark built this company on a logistics model I designed. It works. But in his haste to impress you, Mr. Kane, he cut corners." She projected a slide onto the wall. It was a mess of red lines and numbers. "He stopped paying the maintenance contracts on the transport fleet 6 months ago to inflate the quarterly profits," Beryl explained. "He's been routing shipments through shell companies to hide losses. And the Jersey City hub, the one I now own, it's the only one certified for medical transport." She turned to Kane. "If I close that hub tomorrow, Vortex loses its pharmaceutical contract with the government. That's a $3 billion loss." Kane looked at the file, then at Mark. The silence was suffocating. "What do you want?" Kane asked, ignoring Mark completely. "I want the merger cancelled," Beryl said. "I want Mark removed as CEO for gross incompetence, and I want Streamline Logistics to be absorbed into Phoenix Holdings at a discount." "You're insane," Mark screamed. "I built this. You were just a waitress." Beryl finished for him. She stood up, her eyes blazing. "I was the partner you forgot to value, and now I'm the creditor you can't afford to pay." Mark looked around the room for support. He looked at Jessica, who was sitting in the corner taking notes. "Jessica, call the legal team," Mark barked. Jessica slowly closed her notebook. She looked at Mark, then at the powerful, radiant woman standing at the head of the table. "Actually, Mark," Jessica said, standing up, "I think I'm resigning. I don't date bankrupt men." She walked out. The door clicking shut sounded like a gunshot. Mark slumped into a chair, defeated. The board voted unanimously 5 minutes later. Mark was out. Beryl had won. She walked out of the building with Julian, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They got into the back of his limousine. "We did it," she breathed, laughing. "Did you see his face?" Julian was watching her, a look of intense pride and something deeper in his eyes. "You were magnificent, Beryl. You didn't just win. You ruled." He reached out and took her hand. The chemistry that had been simmering between them for days finally boiled over. Beryl leaned in, and Julian met her halfway. He kissed her, a fierce, passionate kiss that tasted of victory and rain and Earl Grey tea. For a moment, everything was perfect. But in the world of high-stakes business, perfection is usually a warning sign. 2 days after the takeover, Beryl was sitting in her new office, Mark's old office, rearranging the furniture. She wanted to purge his energy from the room. Julian had gone to the bank to finalize the asset transfer. He had left his phone on the desk, forgetting it in his rush. It buzzed. A text message. Beryl glanced at it, intending to ignore it, but the name on the screen froze her blood. Arthur Kane. Why was the CEO of Vortex texting Julian? Curiosity, cold and sharp, pricked her skin. She knew she shouldn't, but the paranoia that Mark had instilled in her was hard to shake. She unlocked the phone. Julian had told her his passcode was 1428, her arrival time that night, and opened the message. Kane. The girl has done her part. Sterling is crushed. When do we announce that Phoenix is actually a subsidiary of Vortex? I want my algorithm back, Julian, as agreed. Beryl stopped breathing. Phoenix is a subsidiary of Vortex. I want my algorithm back. As agreed. The world tilted on its axis. The text implied that Julian and Kane were working together. That this whole thing, the rescue, the revenge, the Phoenix, was just a way for Julian to get his technology back from Vortex. And she was just the weapon he used to destroy Mark, so Kane would make a deal. No, she whispered. He wouldn't. She scrolled up. There were no other messages. They had been deleted. She heard the elevator ding. Julian walked in, carrying a bottle of champagne and looking happier than she had ever seen him. I got the signatures, Julian beamed. It's official. We own it all. Beryl, why are you looking at me like that? Beryl stood up, holding the phone out like it was a grenade. Arthur Kane just texted you, she said, her voice dead. He asked when you're going to hand Phoenix over to him. He said, as agreed. Julian's face went pale. The joy evaporated instantly. Beryl, wait. Don't read that out of context. Context? Beryl laughed, a broken sound. You told me Kane was your enemy. You told me he stole your life's work. But you're working with him? Was this whole thing a setup? Did you just use me to get Mark out of the way so you could sell the company back to Vortex and get your algorithm? It's not like that, Julian pleaded, stepping toward her. Yes, Kane approached me. He knew I was the only one who could take Mark down. He offered to return my IP if I facilitated the takeover. But what? Beryl cried, tears stinging her eyes. You made me believe we were partners. You made me believe you cared. But I was just another napkin plan, wasn't I? A tool to get what you wanted. No, Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. I started this for the algorithm, yes. I was angry. I wanted my life back. But then I met you. Beryl, everything changed when I met you. I haven't responded to Kane because I'm not going to give it to him. I was going to double-cross him. How can I believe you? Beryl asked, grabbing her purse. Mark lied to me for 10 years. You managed to do it in 10 days. Beryl, don't walk out, Julian begged. If you walk out that door, Kane will come after you. He's dangerous. I survived Mark, Beryl said, walking to the door. I can survive you. She walked out of the office, past the confused secretaries, and into the elevator. She felt shattered. The victory was hollow. The man she was falling for was a liar. She stepped out onto the street, blinded by tears. A black van pulled up to the curb. The side door slid open. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. Ms. Vance? One said. Yes? Mr. Kane would like a word. Before she could scream, they grabbed her arms. They weren't rough, but they were firm. They guided her into the van. As the door slid shut, Beryl saw Julian running out of the building, shouting her name. But it was too late. The van sped off into the New York traffic. She was alone again. But this time, she wasn't just fighting for her dignity. She was fighting for her life. The inside of the van smelled of sterile leather and expensive cologne, the scent of a kidnapping that had been paid for with a corporate credit card. Beryl sat sandwiched between the 2 men, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She knew that in the world she had entered, physical resistance was useless. This was a war of leverage, and right now she had none. Her mind replayed the image of Julian running after the van, the desperation on his face. Was it real? The doubt was a poison, spreading faster than the fear. That text message from Arthur Kane, as agreed, had shattered the fragile trust she had built. If Julian was just using her to get his algorithm back, then she wasn't a CEO. She was just a pawn who had been promoted to a queen, solely to be sacrificed in the end game. The van slowed, turning into the underground garage of a glass spire that pierced the Manhattan skyline. Vortex Tower. Please, Ms. Vance, one of the guards said, gesturing for her to exit. His tone was polite, which made it all the more terrifying. Mr. Kane is waiting. They escorted her into a private elevator. As the numbers climbed, 40, 50, 60. Beryl straightened her spine. She checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set. She remembered the woman who had stood in the rain outside Julian's house. That woman was gone. The woman in the elevator had bankrupted a CEO in a week. She could handle Arthur Kane. The doors opened directly into a penthouse office that spanned the entire floor. It was a cold, cavernous space of glass and steel overlooking the Hudson River. The city lights below looked like spilled jewels, beautiful and indifferent. Arthur Kane stood by the window, his back to her. He was a small man, physically unimposing, but he carried himself with the heavy gravity of a man who owned senators. "Thank you for joining me, Beryl," Kane said, turning around. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch. "I apologize for the dramatic invitation, but Julian has been difficult. He's stopped answering my calls. I assume you know why." Beryl walked further into the room, refusing to be intimidated. "I saw the text, Arthur. As agreed. You and Julian were working together. Kane smiled, a thin reptile stretching of his lips. Working together is a strong phrase. Let's say we had a mutual alignment of interests. Julian wanted his legacy back, the shipping algorithm I took from him 5 years ago. I wanted streamlined logistics absorbed into Vortex to monopolize the market. We made a trade. He would use you to destroy Mark Sterling, driving the stock price down so I could acquire it cheaply. In exchange, I would return his intellectual property. Beryl felt the bile rise in her throat. Hearing it said out loud made it real. So it was all a lie. The rescue, the Phoenix holdings, it was just a performance. Julian is a method actor, my dear, Kane said, walking to his massive glass desk. He needed a face for the hostile takeover, a sympathetic face, the scorned wife. The media loved it. You were the perfect weapon. But now, the war is over. The weapon needs to be decommissioned. He sat down and slid a thick document across the desk. Beside it lay a gold fountain pen. This transfers full ownership of Phoenix Holdings, and by extension, the assets of Streamline Logistics, to Vortex Corp, Kane explained. Sign it, Beryl. And if I don't? Beryl asked, her voice steady, despite the trembling of her hands. If you don't, Kane sighed, as if bored, I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. I will freeze your assets. I will sue you for corporate espionage. I will make sure that the $5,000 Mark gave you looks like a fortune compared to what you'll have left. You'll be destitute, Beryl. Back to the diner. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. But if you sign, I will wire $10 million to an offshore account in your name. Tonight. You can leave New York. You can leave the heartbreak. You can be free. $10 million. Beryl looked at the pen. It was freedom. It was safety. It was a guarantee that she would never have to rely on a man like Mark or a liar like Julian ever again. Why do you need me to sign? Beryl asked softly. If you and Julian had a deal, why isn't he here signing it? Kane's expression darkened for a split second. Julian is sentimental. He's having second thoughts. He thinks he can renegotiate. But he forgets that I hold the cards. I have the patent on the algorithm. Without me, his life's work is legally mine. Beryl reached for the pen. The metal was cold against her skin. She thought about the last week, the thrill of the boardroom, the way Julian looked at her when she solved the logistics problem in the Jersey City hub. Was it all fake? Could a man fake the way his heart raced when he kissed her? She looked at Kane. You said Julian is having second thoughts. That means he hasn't agreed to give you the company yet. He will, Kane snapped. Once he knows you've taken the money, he'll realize there's nothing left to fight for. Beryl held the pen over the paper. The ink was ready to flow. All she had to do was write Beryl Vance. Then she remembered the first night at 1428 Willow Street. Julian hadn't asked her for her resume. He hadn't asked for her contacts. He had asked if she took her tea with lemon. He had seen her when she was invisible to the world. No, Beryl whispered. She capped the pen. She looked up at Kane. I won't sign. Kane's face turned red. You stupid girl. Do you think he loves you? He's a broken genius who hasn't left his house in 5 years. You are a project to him. Maybe, Beryl said, standing up. But I'm not a project to myself anymore. I built Phoenix Holdings. I sat in that chair. I fired Mark. I did that. And I'm not selling my self-respect for $10 million. Not to you. She picked up the contract. With a slow, deliberate motion, she tore it down the middle. Then she tore it again. She let the pieces flutter onto Kane's pristine desk like confetti. "Get out," Kane whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "Security! Take her somewhere where she—" Crash! The double doors to the office didn't just open, they exploded inward. The two guards who had been stationed outside stumbled into the room, shoved violently by a force of nature. Julian Thorne stood in the doorway. He looked wild. His coat was gone. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a bruise forming on his collarbone. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Get away from her, Arthur," Julian roared. The sound echoed off the glass walls, primal and terrifying. Kane stood up, knocking his chair over. "You barge into my office? You assault my staff? This is criminal trespassing, Julian." Julian ignored him. He walked straight to Beryl. He didn't check the room for threats. He only checked her face. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight, desperate. "Did you sign?" Julian demanded, his eyes searching hers. "Beryl, tell me you didn't sign." "I didn't," she said, her voice breaking. "I tore it up." Julian let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. For a moment, in the middle of the enemy's lair, he just held her. "Thank God. I thought I was too late. I thought you'd take the money and I'd lose you." Beryl pulled back, confused. "Lose me? Kane said you wanted the algorithm. He said that was the deal." Julian turned to face Kane, keeping Beryl firmly behind him. "That was the offer, Arthur, not the deal. I never agreed to give you Phoenix. I never agreed to betray her." "You wanted your code back," Kane screamed, losing his composure entirely. "It's the only thing you care about. It's your legacy." "It was my legacy," Julian corrected, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "until I found something worth more." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black tablet. He held it up. "You think you have leverage over me because you hold the patent to the Thorne Protocol, right?" Julian asked. "You think that because you stole it, I can't use it without your permission?" "I have armies of lawyers, Julian," Kane spat. "If you try to use that code in Phoenix's logistics, I will shut you down in an hour." "I know," Julian smiled. It was the smile Beryl had seen that first night. Dangerous, brilliant, and unpredictable. "That's why I didn't use it. And that's why you can't use it anymore either." "What are you talking about?" Kane narrowed his eyes. 5 minutes ago, Julian said, tapping the screen. "I uploaded the source code of the Thorne Protocol to the global open-source repository. I released the encryption keys. I published the entire architecture." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Kane's face went from red to a ghostly white. You released it? To the public?" "To everyone," Julian nodded. "To universities, to startups, to every shipping company in China, Europe, and America. By tomorrow morning, your competitors will be building their systems on my tech, free of charge." "You're lying," Kane whispered. He scrambled for his keyboard, typing furiously. Beryl watched Kane's face as he read the screen. She saw the exact moment his empire crumbled. The proprietary technology that gave Vortex its edge, the technology he had blackmailed Julian for, was now worthless. It was as common as the air. "You destroyed it," Kane gasped, looking up at Julian with horror. "That code was worth $20 billion. You just burned $20 billion. "I burned your leverage," Julian said coldly. "I burned the leash you had on me." He turned to Beryl, his expression softening. "He was right, Beryl. I did start this to get the code back. I wanted revenge. But when I saw you walking out of my office today, when I realized you thought I was just like Mark, I realized that $20 billion is just paper. It's just noise. I would burn the whole world down before I let you think I didn't love you." Beryl felt the tears finally spill over. This wasn't a business tactic. This was a sacrifice. He had nuked his own masterpiece to save her from Kane's grip. "You idiot," she sobbed, laughing through the tears. "You brilliant, stupid idiot." Julian grinned, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I believe that's my job title. Chairman and Chief Idiot." He turned back to Kane, who was slumped in his chair, staring at the screen where his stock value was likely already plummeting. "We're leaving, Arthur," Julian said. "Phoenix Holdings is independent. We have the assets, we have the fleet, and we have Beryl Vance. We don't need the secret sauce anymore. We're going to beat you the old-fashioned way. We're going to outwork you." Julian took Beryl's hand. "Ready to go home?" "Not 14-128. "Willow," Beryl said, squeezing his hand. "Let's go to our headquarters. I have a company to run." They walked out of the penthouse, leaving Arthur Kane alone in his glass tower, surrounded by wealth that suddenly felt very fragile. The aftermath. The ride back to the city was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of exhaustion and relief. Julian sat close to her, his hand never leaving hers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, looking out the window. "I should have told you about Kane's texts from the beginning. I thought I could handle him. I thought I could outsmart him without dragging you into the mud." "You did handle him," Beryl said. "Just dramatically." She turned to him. "But Julian, the code, are you really okay? That was your life's work." Julian looked at her. "Beryl, for 5 years I sat in a dark house, guarding that code, like a dragon guarding gold. It made me miserable. It made me lonely. Tonight, when I hit upload, I didn't feel a loss. I felt light. I felt free." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "I can write new code. I can build new algorithms. But I can't find another you." Beryl leaned her head on his shoulder. "Well, Mr. Thorne, since you're currently unemployed and your best work is now public property, I suppose I have a job opening at Phoenix. We need a CTO, but you'll have to interview." "I have good references," Julian murmured, closing his eyes. "And I sleep with the boss." "We'll see about that," Beryl laughed. 1 year later, the annual New York Business Gala was always a spectacle of excess, but this year the buzz was different. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of the power pair. In just 12 months, Phoenix Logistics had revolutionized the shipping industry. Without the restriction of proprietary patents, the entire global supply chain had become faster and more efficient, but Phoenix led the charge because they had the best leadership. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the red carpet. The door opened. First came the flashbulbs. Then came the whispers. Beryl Vance stepped out. She looked nothing like the woman who had been discarded by Mark Sterling. She wore a gown of liquid gold that seemed to glow under the lights. Her posture was regal, her gaze confident. She wasn't just a participant in the economy, she was a titan. Julian followed her. He had traded his sweatpants for a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He looked healthy, vibrant, and deeply happy. They walked the carpet, stopping for photos. "Ms. Vance! Ms. Vance!" a reporter shouted. "Phoenix just acquired Vortex Corp this morning. Is it true you're dissolving the brand?" Beryl smiled at the camera. "We are. Vortex is a relic of the past. We're turning their headquarters into a training center for young entrepreneurs, specifically for women who are restarting their careers." The crowd cheered. As they moved toward the entrance, a man pushed his way to the front of the velvet rope. He looked haggard. His suit was wrinkled, his hair thinning. "Beryl!" She stopped. She knew that voice. It was a ghost from a former life. Mark Sterling stood there. He looked smaller than she remembered, After he was ousted from Streamline, no other company would touch him. The industry knew he had cooked the books. He was toxic. "Beryl, please," Mark said, his eyes desperate. "I need a minute. I have a business proposal. I know the Asian markets better than anyone. I can help you." Beryl looked at him. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel hate. She felt nothing. He was just a stranger with a bad pitch. "I'm sorry, Mark," Beryl said, her voice cool and professional. "We're fully staffed, and our hiring standards are quite rigorous regarding integrity." "But I made you," Mark shouted, desperation turning to anger as security stepped in. "You were nothing without me." Beryl laughed. It was a genuine, joyful sound. "Mark," she said, leaning in slightly, "you didn't make me. You just held me back. Watch me fly." She turned away, taking Julian's arm. "Who was that?" Julian asked, though he knew perfectly well. "Nobody," Beryl said. "Just a bad investment I wrote off a long time ago." They walked up the grand staircase into the ballroom where the music was playing and the future was waiting. Beryl Vance had walked through the rain, knocked on the wrong door, and found the right life. And as the doors closed behind them, shutting out the cold, she knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the empire. And that, my friends, is how you checkmate a narcissist. Can we just take a moment to appreciate the absolute power move of Julian releasing his $20 billion code just to save Beryl? That is the definition of burn the boats energy. This story reminds us that sometimes the worst day of your life, the day the divorce papers are signed, the day you lose your home, is actually just the first page of your best chapter. Beryl thought she was being buried, but she was actually being planted. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of revenge, romance, and redemption, please smash that like button. It helps us create more stories like this for you. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to know when our next drama drops. Until next time, remember, know your worth and then add tax. Thanks for watching.